Hello there. This is Hunter Lichen with Life in the Soil, and I just wanted to share some information about the soil food web and why being a soil steward is so important. So, what you're seeing now are images of organisms I filmed on my microscope. It's a ciliate there, it's a nematode, and another ciliate, and yeah, these critters all play a crucial role. They help each other, eat each other, basically keeping the soil healthy and in check. So, have you ever considered soil to be home for organisms? Billions can be found in just a handful of seemingly dead brown matter. So, why should we care about these critters? Well, I'm going to give you some examples. These are some of the things that the soil can do for us. So if we steward it well and treat it with respect. So some of the big ones are decrease of leaching and erosion, which helps to hold nutrients. Increase of carbon sequestration. Helping protect surfaces of plants from disease and pest pressure. So if you do have a plant that's, let's say, covered in aphids, or is looking sickly, then that usually indicates that there isn't proper biology present in your soil. And another big one that healthy soil can do is increase water holding capacity. So this is, I guess a big picture of the soil food web, or, the food chain going on in the soil. So the plant's root exudates are released to the bacteria and the fungi, and the bacteria and the fungi are eaten by many different organisms: nematodes, mites, protozoa, and then those in turn are eaten by higher trophic organisms, and the cycle just keeps continuing. Here's a picture of some of the other players in this game. Some of the bigger animals like birds who eat the worm, consume the worms and the seeds and distribute those, and then little mammals like voles and mice, and everybody's working together for the better of the soil. So where does most of this activity happen? In the O and A horizons, the top roughly 10 inches of soil. There are earthworms that can go below that, but most of the bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes stick around in the top O and A horizons. So the O horizon is where organic matter and dead plants lay, and then the A horizon consists of plant roots, bacteria, and fungi. This is a picture of bacteria. So no matter how lifeless soil looks, there's a good chance that bacteria is present, and bacteria get things going. They make the soil an environment where weed seeds can germinate, and those in turn bring up minerals. Some weeds like thistles, they mine for minerals lower down in the soil and bring them up to the surface, and they help with structure. There are several different kinds of bacteria. Right here we have Coccus diplococci. This is sometimes considered like a cluster of grapes. That's the Staphylococci. Here's a long chain, Streptococci. Moving down into bacilli, a round rod, Cocobacillus, and then Bacillus, and then a chain of bacilli. These organisms over here usually indicate low oxygen anaerobic conditions, especially corkscrew snake-like looking spirochete or spirella. So if you see those in the soil, through a microscope, it's usually cause for concern. So how do bacteria replicate? When bacteria accumulate enough nutrients and energy, the cell will undergo binary fission, splitting into two separate cells. Under the right conditions, bacteria can reproduce every 20 minutes. If conditions are poor, bacteria go idle, dormant, or die. So here is a spore. At dormant stages, bacteria shut down metabolic activity and form a spore. Spores can survive for up to several hundred years, but in extreme fluctuation conditions, survival rates will decline. And where do most bacteria like to hang out? Not just bacteria, but other organisms like protozoa, fungi, and the rhizosphere, which is the area around the plant's roots. Here is an electron microscope image of bacteria hanging around the roots of plants. Pretty wild. Bacteria like to consume simple foods such as root exudates and fresh plant litter. Bacteria like to thrive in low oxygen conditions. Soil types are which is why you will mainly see weeds like this thistle, which are a good indication of low oxygen bacterial dominant soils, because the roots are easy for the plants to consume, so they make that environment possible for weeds to thrive. Okay, filamentous or thread-like fungi grow at the tip, elongating the hypha as the fungus takes up and accumulates nutrients and energy. With adequate food resources, each hypha will branch and branch again. So right here at the tip is usually going to be a 5-to-1 carbon nitrogen ratio, but as the hypha gets older, the carbon to nitrogen ratio increases. So this is a good example of the carbon holding capacity of fungi and why we should be disturbing the soil less, because when you disturb the soil, then you break up all the fungal hypha strands. So different kinds of fungi. These are decomposers or saprophytic fungi, and they convert dead organic matter into fungal biomass. Here we have what would be considered a mutualist or mycorrhizal fungi, and they colonize around plant roots. In exchange for carbon from the plant, mycorrhiza will solubilize phosphorus and bring soil nutrients to the plant. So here's an example of that. You have the fungal hypha reaching as far as it can away from the roots of the plants, bringing the plant back what it needs. Lichen are also an example of mutualists, and they serve as a food source for critters such as deer and birds, as well as they are a good indication of pollutants in the air, such as copper or lead, which can be deadly to lichen. So if lichen are struggling, it's a good indication of pollutant levels in the air. Here is an example of pathogenic fungi. And this is an example of a parasitic fungi. Parasitic fungi grow throughout the cavity of this ant using internal organs using its internal organs as food, while the ant's strong exoskeleton serves as a kind of capsule, protecting the fungi from drying out, being eaten, or further infection. Fungi also act as biocontrol agents. Here we have a nematode trapping fungi, and this usually occurs when the fungi run out of food. So the nematode will be swimming along, and then it will get entangled in these little rings, and then the fungi will clamp down on the nematode and then start consuming it. So fungi secure food through the act of enzyme secretion while growing on surfaces. The enzymes digest this food, which is absorbed directly through the hyphal walls. Different fungal groups produce different types of spores. All of these spores can resist severe environmental disturbances. Depending on intensity and duration of the disturbance, spores can survive for several hundreds of years. These are examples of protozoa. So you have a ciliate, an amoeba, and a flagellate. Ciliates are one of the bigger members of the protozoa family, and they move around by these hairs that are completely cover their body. Here is an example of a shelled amoeba or testate amoeba. And this is an example of a naked amoeba, so it's usually like blob-like, and it moves very slow in the system. And here we have a flagellate that moves around by its flagellum. Protozoan cysts don't appear as robust as fungal or bacterial spores because the cell walls aren't as thick, so they don't survive as long, perhaps only 3 to 9 months. And moving on to nematodes, we have bacterial, fungal, root-feeding, predatory, and omnivore. And as you can see, nematodes are usually identified by their mouths. So fungal have this stellate, as well as root feeding and omnivore, and then the predatory have this little tooth, and bacterial have fancy lips. So here's an example of a bacterial feeder. And this is an example of a root feeder. So the stellate will come out of this little hole, and they puncture the thick cell wall of the plants and then pull internal contents of the plant cell into the nematode. They can cause severe damage to the roots. Another indication of these knobs that is a root-feeding nematode. Here we have a predatory, which is pretty terrifying to me. They often have a preference for root-feeding nematodes. But yeah, it's pretty scary. And here's an example of it eating another nematode, and consuming it. Here we have an omnivore nematode, and they again have a large spear and feed on many different soil organisms. The presence of omnivore nematodes indicates the soil food web is diverse and relatively stable. Moving on to arthropods. Arthropods feed on a wide range of materials, from organic matter, lichen, bacteria, fungi. They provide an essential food source for the larger bugs. They shred and digest organic materials, speeding up decomposition, while their poop inoculate soils with bacterial and fungal spores. This is a predatory mite. Arthropods range in size from microscopic to several inches in length. They include mites, springtails, beetles, and ants. Here's just an example of the wide range of sizes and structure of mites that are present in the soil. Through their feeding, they can stimulate microbial activity. When they graze on bacteria and fungi, they stimulate the growth of mycorrhiza and fungi. They also mineralize plant nutrients and enhance soil aggregation. So each time a soil passes through an arthropod, it is thoroughly mixed with organic matter and mucus, then deposited as fecal pellets. The pellets are a concentrated nutrient resource for soil life. Here's an example of a springtail. They are very abundant. Populations of tens of thousands per square yard are frequent. When foraging, springtails walk with 3 pairs of legs. When they encounter a predator, body fluid reaches the tail base, forcing the tail to slap down and catapult the springtail as much as a yard away. Springtails are beneficial to crop plants by releasing nutrients and feeding upon disease-causing fungi. So, what all these organisms in the soil food web do is something called the poop loop. So organisms feed on each other, therefore enhancing nutrients in the soil and creating an environment that's healthier for plants to live. So I appreciate your time. I hope this was informative, and if you have any suggestions as to how this could be better, I'd appreciate it. Appreciate the feedback, and I hope you have a marvelous day.